Tales from the Archives, Volume 1.
The official anthology of the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences.
Welly, where would you like this case file?
I think there's a small end table with nothing on it. Put it there.
Jolly good.
Supply request for archives. One end table, small. Preferably iron.
That was not my fault, Wellington. Look at the size of this case file.
Oh, those must be addendum notes from my predecessor.
Your predecessor?
Contrary to popular belief, there was someone else down here before me. Perhaps not as economic with his words when it came to reports and evaluations. The man fancied himself a writer.
He wanted to be a writer. Good Lord, I can't imagine a profession more dire or dreary than that of a writer.
I can. Actor.
Ugh. So, Welly, whatever happened to your predecessor?
Now, that seems to be a mystery in itself. He just disappeared.
Disappeared? You mean down here in the archives?
So I was led to believe. It is a reason many people do not care to come down here.
What do you think happened?
Considering what we do for Queen and Country, anything.
Hanuman's Gift by Helen H. Madden. The night was dark, black as sin and full of hidden secrets, much like the eyes of the beautiful woman trapped in his arms. Augustus Whitby knew from experience how dangerous this particular lady could be, and he dared not let her escape from his grasp. Lady Catherine Blackwell would just as likely stab him in the back with one of the wicked little stilettos she was known to keep hidden on her person, as she was to kiss him. He certainly hoped she was in the mood for the latter, not the former. "Tell me where it is," he murmured to her. His voice was barely audible above the whispering night breeze that carried with it the exotic scents of incense and ripe fruit, offerings left by the local natives for the monkey god Hanuman, in whose temple they stood. "Where is what?" the dusky-eyed lady murmured back, coy as always. Augustus smiled. "You know what I mean, darling Catherine. Hanuman's Gift. I'm sure you've seen it. Big gold statue thingy, in the shape of a monkey, encrusted with rubies and pearls." The lady chuckled. "Oh, that gaudy thing. Really, my dear Augustus, I thought you had better taste." "This is not about taste, my dear. It's a matter of great importance to the Empire. That gaudy thing, as you call it, is a priceless relic of unfathomable mystical power. I've been charged by the Ministry to bring it back to London immediately. You see, they fear that in the wrong hands it could spell the end to Britain's rule over the crown jewel of the Empire." "And how could such a trinket do that?" the lovely thief said, flashing him a winsome smile. "Well, I suppose it... Oh, dash it all." Augustus Whitby threw down his pen, once again foiled by the cleverness of Lady Catherine Blackwell. It didn't matter that the woman was nothing more than words scratched into his personal journal. That particular character always found a way to confound him during his writing. He would no sooner have set just the right scene for one of his stories, a very romantic scene at that, than she would open her lovely mouth and utter something that would completely disrupt his entire plot. Like asking him questions about unimportant details he didn't have the answers for yet. Didn't that blasted woman understand that he was writing a story, for God's sake? He couldn't be bothered with such trivialities as the actual purpose of a mystical artifact. Wasn't it enough that the stupid thing existed in the first place? And that it threatened the British Empire? Augustus stared at his journal. The nib of his pen leaked a dark stain across the name of his main character, which was his name, of course. After all, why bother writing exotic tales of adventure if you couldn't write yourself into them? That's what those buffoons up at the Ministry's main office were always doing. He eyed the growing pile of boxes stacked before his desk, each one containing the so-called reports and collected evidence of the cases worked by the ministry's field agents. When he'd first been assigned to work in the archives of the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences, he'd peeked into some of those boxes, even read through the reports. Utter rubbish. As if he was actually supposed to believe any of the nonsense stored in there. An underwater base in the lost city of Atlantis? Ridiculous. A mystical portal in Newgrange, Ireland, that opened a door to an alternate reality every winter solstice? Ha! Oh, sure, the field agents had an advantage over him in being able to travel to the settings for their little tales. If one spends a few weeks jaunting around South America, one is bound to get some of the local details right. But that was about as factual as any of these reports ever got, Augustus decided. The rest of it was sheer mystical mumbo-jumbo nonsense. He looked again at the boxes of case reports surrounding his desk, stacked 5 feet deep in places, and sniffed. His stories were much better than any field agent's could ever be, even if he did never leave this miserable little hole Dr. Sound had assigned him to. He turned back to his journal and sighed. I should have been a journalist, he thought to himself. Then at least I could have gotten out a bit for my writing, and perhaps even become famous to boot. He picked up his pen and dipped it into the inkwell on his desk. Lady Blackwell's last words on the journal page taunted him. With a sigh, he did what he always did in such cases. He drew a large X over the entire story so far, a grand total of 2 full pages, the furthest he'd ever managed to get in any of his tales, and then he turned to the next blank page in the book. It was frustrating, but he couldn't imagine finishing the story at this point. He would abandon this tale and start anew, begin a different story, one that didn't involve the troublesome Lady Blackwell. Although he had to admit, of all his leading ladies, the sly and saucy brunette was his favorite. He pressed the nib of his pen to the blank page and began to write. It was a dark and stormy night. The door to the archives flung open. A tall figure stepped through. Even from this distance, Augustus recognized the polished blonde hair and arrogant bearing of Agent Harrison Thorne. "Whitby!" The agent's voice boomed into the cavernous confines of the archives. The sheer noise of it caused Augustus's pen to skid across the journal page, leaving a dark, ragged line behind it. "Are you down there, you lazy devil? I've got a little present for you." Augustus snapped his journal shut and gritted his teeth. He knew all too well what Agent Thorne's present must be. Once again he eyed the pile of boxes sitting in front of his desk and groaned. Agent Harrison Thorne had completed yet another field mission and was now about to deposit the dregs of it at Augustus's feet. What joy! Thorne clattered down the 4 stories of stairs, humming a sprightly tune as he went. With far too much energy, Augustus thought, he crossed the expanse of the archive's main office and deposited the expected box on top of the growing wall created by its brothers. "Bloody hell, Whitby! Don't you do a damn thing down here? I can see at least 2 of my previous reports still sitting where I last left them." "I'm busy," Augustus snapped. He tapped the closed journal in front of him. "In case you hadn't noticed, I have quite a bit of work to do." "I'll say you do," Thorne replied, eyeing the boxed reports. "Aren't you supposed to, I don't know, store these things? Someplace other than right here where we agents leave them?" I can't be bothered with such menial tasks as lifting and filing." "Wait, stop! That's my journal!" Agent Thorne grinned and held aloft the leather-bound volume he had just snatched from Augustus's hands. Now, I just want to see what's so important that you don't have time to spare for anything else. Let's see here." He flipped through the book until a particular page caught his eye, and he began to read aloud. "Oh, Augustus," the voluptuous redhead sighed. "However shall we escape? There must be 40 thuggees, and you are unarmed." "Not quite, my dear," the brave Augustus answered, withdrawing a howitzer from the front of his trousers. Thorn broke off, his face crinkling into a poorly suppressed grin. "Whitby," he choked out, "you do realize a howitzer is a bit large to be stuffing down your trousers." Augustus snatched back the book. "I haven't finished researching the details yet." "I see." A snort of laughter escaped from between Thorn's compressed lips. Moments later, the tall man's body was shaking with the force of his guffaws. "Oh, for God's sake, Whitby, whatever you do, don't let Dr. Sound catch you down here writing this drivel. You'll be out on the street in no time, and if you have to depend on your writing skills to survive, you'll starve." Obviously amused with this observation, Thorn threw back his head and howled. Augustus sneered. "Oh, do laugh. I'm so glad to provide you with entertainment. But I could say the same things about you and your writing. I've read some of your so-called mission reports. Undead creatures who survive on the blood of the living. Ghostly apparitions of lost ships that lead sailors to their deaths in uncharted waters. Rubbish. At least my tales are meant to amuse. You agents simply make up your stories to justify your little jaunts around the world. You won't even admit that your reports are fiction, and second-rate at that." Agent Thorne's laughter quieted. "Fiction, is it? You think we agents go out into the field and make up stories about how we risk our lives fighting for Queen and country? Do you honestly believe anything you've written?" Augustus challenged. Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Oh, yes. Yes, I do. Especially this last case. Shall I tell you about it?" Agent Thorne settled on the edge of Augustus's desk and leaned over the smaller man. Augustus hated it when Thorne did this. He knew it was nothing but a deliberate attempt on Thorne's part to intimidate him. He would not let himself be bullied, though. He squared his shoulders and stared right back into Thorne's glinting eyes. "Well, if you're going to tell, then tell," he said. The corners of Thorne's mouth turned up in a bitter smile. "Right. I've been in India the last 3 weeks, in the village of Chiranjeevi. It's in the jungles of Bombay." "Oh, really? How was the weather?" "Delightfully hot and sticky. It's monsoon season, you know." "How nice. And what did you do on your holiday, Agent Thorne?" "I was hunting for a monkey." Augustus raised an eyebrow at this. "A monkey? Really? How exciting." This particular monkey was. Seems it was part of a pack that had become a menace to the village. The beasts had been preying upon the local population for some time, stealing food from people's houses, tearing up crops and such. They did quite a lot of damage, but the locals wouldn't touch them. Monkeys are considered sacred animals in India. The buggers even pillaged the holdings of a number of local British families, including those of an official recently assigned there, one Sir Chauncey Stewart by name. Sir Chauncey was an aide to the lieutenant governor in those parts, and he despised the creatures, thought they were a nuisance and ought to be done away with. So he called the ministry, and you got assigned to do pest control? I must say, I'm surprised an exalted agent such as yourself took on the case. It doesn't exactly sound like a ministry job." Thorne shook his head. "It wasn't, and I was not called in at that point. As I said, the monkeys were revered by the village populace, despite the trouble they were causing, and Sir Chauncey was not willing to risk sparking a revolt by trampling local beliefs. So he let the matter be. But then one day, a few of the beasts attacked a child. The poor boy had made the mistake of wandering outside his home with a bit of food. When the monkeys saw him, they went after the tyke and damn near killed him, all for some fruit. This Sir Chauncey couldn't tolerate, so he prepared to deal with the monkeys on his own. He laid a trap in his garden one night, setting out a veritable feast for the creatures. Then he and a few soldiers from the local garrison waited for them to appear. They didn't have to wait long. As soon as the monkeys noticed the food, they clambered over Sir Johnsey's orchard wall, and the men began shooting. Killed quite a few of the beasts, it seems. The rest of the pack scattered, of course, leaving their fallen brethren behind. Their numbers were greatly reduced, and Sir Chauncey considered the problem to be solved. Unfortunately, his actions did not sit well with the villagers. So there was an uprising. No, though the people were very upset. The local Pandaren came that very night to Sir Chauncey's house and told him that he had committed a sacrilege, and that if he did not do penance for it immediately, Hanuman would curse them all. Augustus's ears pricked up. He slid a hand over his journal. Hanuman? The monkey god? Thorn nodded. The same. Of course, Sir Chauncey, being a practical sort of man, refuted the Pandaran's threats. He even stated that Hanuman should reward him for having rid the village of such violent pests. Then he sent the old man away and prepared to dispose of the dead animals cluttering his garden. But some time during the priest's visit, one of the corpses disappeared, and that's when the real trouble began. Thorn's voice grew quieter now. Augustus had to strain to hear him. There were reports, a few nights later, of a creature haunting the village. People spoke of a monkey, diseased in appearance, and particularly violent in manner. Sounds like the creature was rabid, Augustus said. That's not uncommon in India. Thorn snorted. This particular beast had something much nastier than rabies. The thing was covered in lesions, skin practically rotting off its bones, and a poisonous mixture of foam and blood dripped from its jaws. It was quickly surmised that this monkey was the one who'd gone missing from Sir Chauncey's garden that night. He'd shot it, but not killed it, and now it suffered from some sort of infection in its wounds. It roamed the jungles beyond the village, stealing food but never eating it. Then the occasional small animals started showing up dead, torn apart with vicious bite marks on its head and neck. It wasn't long after that it started attacking the villagers. Thorn leaned closer to Augustus and dropped his voice to a whisper. Tell me, Whitby, do you know what kind of damage a monkey can do when it attacks a person? Well, they're wild animals. I imagine they can be quite vicious. Still, one monkey. Thorn held up a finger. One monkey, one small monkey, can cripple a person. They're damned fast, and as you said, quite vicious. They scratch, they bite, they tear off fingers and gouge out eyes. Bloodthirsty beasts. But this creature was even worse. After weeks of terrorizing the natives in Chiranjeevi, it made its way to Sir Chauncey's domicile. Sir Chauncey had a wife, Catherine, a very beautiful young woman, raven-haired, dark eyes, sweet-tempered, and just 20 years old. She and Sir Chauncey were only recently married and very much in love. One night, while her husband worked late in his library, Mrs. Stewart left open the windows to the bedroom. It was hot, and she wanted to let in the evening breeze. But she let in something else as well. Not long after she retired for the night, Sir Chauncey heard a horrific screaming. He raced from the library to the bedroom. When he flung open the door, he saw his wife collapsed upon the floor, an unholy beast crouching on her chest. It was a monkey. The thing had buried its fangs into her cheek. It tore away half her face, even as he watched. He shouted and began throwing things at it. Books, a jewelry box, one of Catherine's slippers, anything he could get his hands on, but the creature merely dodged all his missiles and remained where it was, grinning like the devil himself and shrieking with unholy laughter. At this, Augustus cleared his throat. The slight noise sounded surprisingly harsh in the gathering shadows of the archives. You must be mistaken, Agent Thorn. Monkeys don't grin or laugh. This one did. Thorn leaned very close now, until he was almost nose to nose with Augustus. It laughed. It held up its paws, covered in the woman's blood, and it laughed. He drew back suddenly. Of course, I don't blame you for not believing that part of the tale. I didn't believe it either when I first interviewed Sir Chauncey. But then I heard it for myself a few nights later. It's a noise I'll never forget. Thorne shivered. He actually shivered. Augustus wasn't sure if he was acting or not, but he had never seen such a display of emotion from the imposing agent before. What happened next? Augustus asked. Sir Chauncey's shouts brought the rest of the household running. In the face of greater numbers, the creature fled. But by then, the damage was done. Catherine was badly mauled. The thing had shredded her once beautiful face, tearing off her lower lip and left cheek. Her right eye was gone. She was missing most of the fingers on one hand. She was a nightmare to behold. I arrived on the scene 2 days after the attack. She was feverish by then, having succumbed to the same disease that afflicted her assailant. She couldn't speak anymore. She just howled. Long, hoarse cries of agony ripped from her throat as she suffered in the grip of a terrible fever. She couldn't drink. Her tongue was so badly swollen and her skin burned to the touch. The lesions had already begun to appear by the time I saw her, and her fair, once flawless skin was rotting away before her husband's eyes. She lingered in that state of misery for another 2 days before she died. Too bad that wasn't the end of it for her. Thorne paused to stare at Augustus. The smaller man felt himself wither beneath the field agent's chilly gaze. Shall I tell you the rest, Whitby? Or shall I leave it to your fertile imagination to complete the tale? Augustus grimaced. You're a horrible storyteller, Thorne. You know that? How can you possibly walk away from a tale at a point like this? Death was not the end for that poor woman? What more could she possibly have endured? She was buried alive, Thorne replied. His words echoed in the stillness of the archives. At least we hope she was. The alternative is too horrific to consider. 3 days after her husband laid her to rest, Catherine Stewart vanished from her grave. I was deep in the jungle by then, tracking the beast that had attacked her. The trail wasn't hard to follow. The creature left plenty of destruction in its wake. But I rushed back to Chiranjeevi as soon as I received the message from Sir Chauncey. To say that his wife's grave had been disturbed would be a blatant understatement. The ground had been torn open, the lid of the casket reduced to splinters. There was blood and bits of rotting flesh found among the debris. And of course, there were footprints. But only one set. And those only led away from the grave, not toward it. Good Lord, Augustus whispered. That poor woman. She awoke in a casket and clawed her way out of her own grave? Thorne nodded. The infection wasn't done with her yet, apparently. It had put her in a death-like state, but then revived her for the final stages of the disease. We quickly found her in the village. Delirious, she shambled through the streets, howling and attempting to attack any person she saw. The locals were terrified and wouldn't do a damn thing to help catch her. She was cursed, they all said, punished by Hanuman for her husband's actions. So I assembled a team from the local garrison. 6 men besides myself and Sir Chauncey, all hardy British soldiers, seasoned veterans not prone to superstition. Together we went back to the village and followed Catherine at a distance, waiting to see what she'd do. I had hoped to capture her. If she were still alive, we might be able to cure her. But then she arrived at the outskirts of the village, at the local temple. Hanuman's temple, Augustus breathed. The very same. And who should be waiting there for that poor woman in a nearby pipple tree but that damnable monkey? Thorne paused to rub his face. It occurred to Augustus that the man looked tired, exhausted even. Did you capture them? Either the monkey or the girl? No. Thorn looked in Augustus's direction, but didn't seem to see him. When we reached the temple, something happened. The monkey howled as Catherine approached, almost as though it were speaking to her. She stopped, then turned toward us. When the beast howled again, she attacked. I have never seen anyone move in such a way. She was fast, and frightfully so. We must have been 50 paces behind her. She crossed that distance in less than a second. It was her husband she went for, splitting the night sky with her screeches as she clawed at his face. I wanted to save her. She was so bloody young. But in that moment, Thorn's hands returned to his face, covering his eyes. 2 of us drew our pistols at the same time. Myself and one of the soldiers who had come on the hunt with us. I can't say which of us shot and hit her first. We were at quite close range. "What about the monkey?" Augustus asked in a hushed voice. "We shot that too. Or rather, Sir Chauncey shot it. After he pushed his way from beneath his wife's corpse, he went after the thing, chased it into the temple. It scaled the shrine until it sat on the shoulders of the statue of Hanuman. That's when I heard it laugh, Whitby. I saw its teeth glinting in the moonlight as it favored us with its feral grin, and it laughed. It was too much for Sir Chauncey. He fired at the thing, blasting it from its perch. And then he emptied his pistol into it, right there at the foot of the monkey god himself. The Pandaren wasn't happy about it, to say the least. He raced into the temple and accused Sir Chauncey of bringing Hanuman's wrath upon the village by killing a sacred emissary. Sir Chauncey responded by striking the man to the ground, and then trying to beat him to death. Pretty soon the rest of the villagers joined in the brawl, and we were right in the thick of it, trying to quash a native revolt. It was a bloody mess. In the end, we managed to settle the matter. After the fighting quieted down, and Sir Chauncey had been dragged away, I explained to the priest that we had done the village a service by taking care of that monstrosity. Everyone had known it was a danger, but religious dictates prevented the locals from doing anything about it. So we outsiders took care of the matter for them. It helped that Sir Chauncey decided to quit his post, and India as well. The man was broken by his wife's demise. He was planning her second funeral when I left, and intended to leave as soon as she was buried again. Augustus snorted. "You're certain the lady was dead this time?" "She took 2 shots at close range, Whitby. We only blew off half her head and left a gaping hole in her chest. Anyway, now here we are in the archives, where I give you my case notes and wash my hands of the whole ordeal. So, what do you think of my story?" Augustus brought his hands together and peered at Thorn over his steepled fingers. "I think it's got a lousy ending. All that death and destruction. Where's the beautiful lady to give you a kiss? And what about the hero's reward?" Thorn sighed. "Weren't you listening? The beautiful lady in this tale died. As for the hero's reward..." He shrugged. "Well, I suppose the Pandaren did present me with a rather odd gift of thanks for my efforts." "What? An emerald necklace? Gold? A map to untold treasures?" Augustus leaned forward, eager to hear this tidbit, but Thorn shook his head. "Nothing like that, I'm afraid. What I got was the monkey." "You got what?" "The monkey. His paw, anyway. Right before I left Chiranjeevi, the priest came to visit me. He said Hanuman had appeared to him in a vision, and told him to give it to me as a reward for my taking care of such a difficult problem. And he put a bit of magic on it, telling me it would grant 3 wishes to 3 men. I accepted it with my thanks, and brought it back here. It's in the box, along with my notes." "Ugh! Surely you don't expect me to store it in here?" "Whitby, I don't expect you to store anything," the agent said, glancing once again at the piled-up boxes of reports. Thorne got up from his perch on Augustus's desk and headed for the stairs leading out of the archives. He was on the 3rd story when Augustus called out, "What about your wishes? Did you make any?" "What do you think?" Thorne called back. Augustus chewed his lower lip for a moment. "I think you did." "So you believe my story, then?" Thorne said. He leaned over the stair railing with an expectant look on his face. "No, but I think you believe it. So what did you wish for?" "What else? A beautiful woman to share my life of adventure, and a nice place to retire to when I'm no longer suited for this line of work. You know, some place where I can lounge around all day in my pajamas." Thorne laughed at that, but Augustus scowled. "That's only 2 wishes. What about the 3rd? "Don't need it. Those are the only things really missing from my life. But tell me, Whitby, what would you wish for? If you believed in my tale, that is." They stared at each other across the vast space of the archives for long moments. Then, with a smile, Thorne turned and ascended the final story of stairs. The door to the archives squealed as he pulled it open. Then it clanged shut behind him. "Nonsense," Augustus muttered. "Absolute, utter nonsense. If he really expects me to believe that tale—" He glared at the box Thorne had left behind. Just to prove the field agent wrong, he got up and pulled off the lid. "I don't know who he thinks he's fooling. There's no monkey's paw in here. Oh, good heavens!" Augustus jumped back, dropping the lid of the box. He stared aghast at the contents he had revealed. Atop a thick stack of papers and 2 leather-bound journals rested what looked like a small bundle of brittle twigs wrapped in moldy, pus-colored parchment, except that the parchment had tufts of yellowed fur clinging to it in places, and the bundled twigs ended in black, ragged nails. Augustus snatched up his pen from his desk and prodded at the pall until he could clearly see the amputated ends of bones sticking out of the wrist. "Oh, disgusting! I should file a complaint with Dr. Sound about this. How dare Thorne leave such a gruesome thing here with me? This and that story of his are nothing but blatant attempts at intimidation and harassment. I shall most definitely be filing a complaint." He shoved the lid back on the box and stalked back to his chair. He would forget Agent Thorne's tale and the unpleasant trophy he had left behind. After all, Augustus had stories of his own to write. Much better stories than anything Thorne could tell. He was quite certain Thorne had made up the whole affair on the spot. In fact, it even sounded as though he had stolen certain details from Augustus's own writing. The temple of Hanuman, the beautiful young woman named Catherine with dark hair and eyes, even the phrase Hanuman's gift. Hadn't he, Augustus Whitby, just written those same details only moments before Thorne had entered the archives? The man was a thief, a stealer of ideas. But let him steal as many stories as he liked. Augustus would simply write more. He would write one now, in fact. He returned to his seat, pulled out his journal, dipped his pen into the inkwell, and turned to a blank page. He would write... Damnation! He stared at the blank page, completely at a loss as to how to fill it. He hated this part of writing. Why did beginning a tale always have to be so hard? He blew out his lips and cast a dark glance at the door 4 stories above, the one through which Thorne had recently exited. It would be much easier to write adventures if someone would just let him out of this miserable prison so he could have one, he thought. He rested his head on the open journal and sighed. God, I wish it wasn't so bloody boring down here. Augustus jumped as some of the boxes stacked around his desk toppled to the ground. Loose papers and journals spilled across the floor. There was the distinct sound of breaking pottery, most likely one of those troublesome relics that had been stored with an agent's field notes. Augustus set his pen down and fumed. Bad enough those dunderheads had to leave everything piled up around him. Couldn't they at least stack things neatly so they wouldn't fall over? He got up, muttering darkly, and went to straighten up the mess. He stuffed papers and journals back into the empty boxes until he noticed that one of the ledgers he was holding had been written by Harrison Thorne. 13 March, Bombay, Augustus read aloud. Sir Chauncey Stuart buried his wife Catherine today. Oh dear. He flipped through several more pages, scanning the sloping handwriting of Field Agent Thorne. A chill ran down Augustus's spine as he recognized details from Thorne's earlier tale. It was all there. The monkeys, Sir Chauncey and his beloved wife, the lady's tragic death, and the horrific events that had followed. Coincidence, Augustus whispered to himself, stuffing the journal into the nearest empty box. Nothing more than that. He gathered up the rest of the papers as quickly as he could, and set the box behind others where he would not have to look at it. He wanted to forget Thorne's tale. He wanted to forget the journal filled with so many details that Thorne could not possibly have stolen from Augustus's own tale and written down prior to visiting the archives. He wanted to bury himself in a new story all of his own making, a proper story where the hero was rewarded with a kiss from a beautiful lady, and maybe something more. He settled at his desk again and prepared to do just that. But when he put his pen to paper, he thought of something else. The monkey's paw. He had not found it with Thorne's journal. Augustus pursed his lips. He hadn't seen it on the floor, and he would have most certainly remembered picking up the disgusting thing and putting it away. If Thorne's journal had fallen out of its crate, it must have fallen out too. But where was it? Could it possibly have slid under his desk? At that moment, something small and fast scrabbled over the tops of his shoes. Augustus shrieked and snatched back his feet, shoving himself away from the desk. His chair toppled over, dumping him onto the floor. He flipped over onto his hands and knees and scrambled away until he ran into an obstacle behind him that was so solid and heavy he could not pass through it, no matter how badly he wanted to. More cursed files, Augustus swore. His heart pounded in his chest and his breath came in ragged gasps. Why Dr. Sound wants to catalog this rubbish is beyond me. The archivist pressed himself flat against the massive bulk of a card catalog that stretched along the wall behind his desk. The wooden behemoth sported several rows of drawers, each filled with musty cards that for some reason Dr. Sound expected him to fill out for every case report that came into the archives. Not bloody likely, Augustus had thought at the time. And he had let the thing collect dust rather than wear out his fingers scribbling useless notes on card after card. But now the archivist discovered the catalog might actually prove handy. The drawers were long, heavy, and removable. Heart still pounding, Augustus snatched at the handle of the nearest drawer and yanked it out of its place. Hundreds of yellowing cards erupted into the air as he swung around and brandished the drawer before him. "Where are you, you bloody bastard?" He spun around, eyes darting from shadow to shadow as he scanned the area around him. Something quick and dark scurried across the floor, coming towards him. Augustus swung the drawer up over his head and brought it smashing down into the floor. He cracked a tile into tiny pieces and dented the end of the drawer, but missed his target entirely as it skittered past him. "Oh, no, you don't!" Augustus swung again, this time splintering his contrived weapon and leaving a nasty dent on the surface of the catalog. The rat, it had to be a rat, scurried inside the open slot just in time. Panting, Augustus stood and listened. He could hear it scrabbling around inside, tiny claws scratching on the wood. When the creature came to a stop, he grabbed another handle and heaved. More cards flew through the air as he brought a second drawer crashing down onto the floor. As before, he shattered a tile and reduced the drawer to kindling, but failed to stop the repulsive sound of skittering claws. So he tore out another drawer, and then another, and another, demolishing each against the floor. White cards fluttered down on him as he decimated the catalog, but still his prey eluded him. At last, Augustus thought he spied the thing creeping out of an empty slot. He grabbed one last drawer and bashed it against the catalog. The drawer burst into smithereens, and he was left holding the useless brass handle. Did I get it? Augustus wondered. He stared at the battered catalog, ears strained for the scuttering sounds of rodent feet. After long moments of silence, interrupted only by the rapid thumping of his heart, he finally relaxed. "That'll teach you," he muttered. Then he looked at the mess of broken wood and paper cards at his feet and sighed. So much trouble for such an insignificant pest. It would take him days to clean this up. It wasn't his fault, though. The archives were overrun with rats now. He should go upstairs and complain to Dr. Sound about that as well as everything else he'd had to endure so far that day. A rodent infestation would make it impossible for him to work down here. The ministry would have to move him out of here to a proper office immediately. But even Augustus knew that would not likely happen. As the archivist kicked aside a broken drawer and righted his chair, he studied the wall of boxes surrounding his desk. Perhaps he should stash these reports in some other spot of the archives. Then he would have a clear view of the floor and be able to keep an eye out for rats and, well, any other pests that might be lurking about. There was a chamber at the farthest end of the archives. It was a dark little cavity that reeked of mildew, but Augustus reminded himself it was at the farthest end of the archives. That made it the perfect place to store these bothersome reports with their grotesque stories and disgusting artifacts. Once he tossed everything in there, he would never have to look at or think about any of it again. He could simply lock the door and be done with it. Not that he needed to lock the door. The contents of these boxes were completely harmless after all. Nothing to worry about, he told himself, as he stood, rolled up his sleeves and prepared for the long, unpleasant task ahead of him. He detested manual labor. But perhaps once he cleared away the current mess, he could convince the field agents to cart their case reports to the farthest recesses of the archives themselves. Augustus examined the nearest box in the pile. There was a label on it identifying the contents as a report from Agent Brandon Hill. Something about a giant hairy ape haunting the mountains in Nepal, Augustus recalled. The man had insisted on boring him with his story, much as Thorne had done earlier, but at least he hadn't brought back any severed body parts. Augustus picked up the box, grunting as he did so. Did Agent Hill really have to write such copious notes, and then collect so much evidence, and dump it all on him? Augustus was definitely making the field agents put away their own reports from now on. He headed into the main corridor of the archives, passing by endless rows of shelves stocked with an equally endless supply of rubbish. Rusting swords, broken pottery, crumbling scrolls, bits and pieces of bizarre machinery. High up on the top shelves there was a large collection of crystal skulls that seemed to glow in the dim light of the archives. There was no rhyme or reason to the storing of these items. Augustus's predecessors had obviously been just as bored and uninspired by the job of archivist as he was. He passed by several shelves filled with jars containing the pickled remains of obscure zoological specimens, and grimaced. Those reminded him too much of Thorne's diseased monkey. Perhaps he would move those items as well, putting them out of sight and out of mind. But for now he needed to deal with these blasted reports. After several minutes of huffing and puffing, Augustus finally reached the end of the corridor and the chamber he sought. Sweating, he dropped the box. It made a crunching noise as it landed on the floor. Augustus winced, but then decided that no one ever returned to look at anything in the archives anyway, so a few broken items didn't really matter. He grabbed the handle to the chamber door and pushed. It refused to budge. He tried again. It still did not move. Wonderful. It's locked. He threw up his hands before trudging back down the corridor. Now he would have to find the key on top of everything else. This whole affair was getting more and more annoying by the moment. He was almost back to his desk when he heard another crash, this time coming from somewhere in the corridor behind him. He spun around, startled. Who's there? No one answered, of course. He was alone down here. Scowling, Augustus headed back down the corridor. In the flickering gaslights, he discovered the shattered remains of several of the jarred zoological specimens he had noticed earlier. The preserved rubbery corpses lay splattered all over the floor, congealing in a pool of foul-smelling yellowish fluid. Augustus groaned. The mess completely blocked the way to the chamber where he had intended to store the reports. Now he would have to clean up this as well. Lovely. Just lovely. Can it possibly get any worse today? He leaned against the now empty shelves in despair. As his hand came to rest on the dusty surface, something small and wiry sprang out of the shadows and landed on his arm. Augustus let out a blood-curdling scream. This was no rat. The thing froze on his wrist long enough to let him get a good look at it, and it looked exactly like a bundle of dried twigs wrapped up in a bit of moldy parchment. But this time, it wasn't lifeless. Fingers moving like mummified spider legs, the monkey's paw scampered over his shoulder and down his back before leaping onto another shelf and disappearing again. Oh God! It can't be! It can't! Shaking, Augustus scrambled away from the spot where the monkey's paw had disappeared. He rubbed his eyes and stared in horrified disbelief. It simply was not possible. There was no way a dried-up, severed monkey's paw could move of its own accord. That bully Thorn was playing a trick on him. He'd obviously convinced the dolts in research and design to build a mechanical hand for the purpose of playing some sick, twisted practical joke. Well, Augustus wouldn't put up with it. He would go to Dr. Sound right this very instant and complain. At a pace somewhere between a walk and a run, Augustus hurried down the corridor. He was in sight of the main chamber when the contents of the shelves in front of him toppled without warning. An array of rusty ceremonial daggers, heavy stone idols, and moldering journals crashed to the floor. Augustus jumped out of the way just in time. He backpedaled and tripped, landing on his rump. Once again he felt the skittering of something small and grisly, this time racing up his trousers. A mindless panic seized him. He began beating at his legs. The thing eluded his blows and scrambled up to his waist. Augustus aimed a punch at his midsection and succeeded in hitting himself in the groin. While he doubled over on the floor and groaned, the paw wormed its way inside his shirt. Augustus shrieked. He could now feel the thing crawling against his body. He screamed and redoubled his efforts, slapping hard at himself, but the paw was too agile. It worked his way up his stomach and ran in circles over his chest. Augustus could feel its ragged nails scratch against his skin. Howling, he writhed on the floor, tearing at his clothing. Oh God, he had to get it off of him. He tore free of his waistcoat just as the paw escaped through his shirt collar and raced up his head. Augustus slapped at it and smacked himself in the face instead. After the stars had cleared from his vision, Augustus sat up. The paw had once again disappeared into the shadows. Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Augustus whimpered and scuttled away, desperate to escape. He crouched against the wall, unsure which direction to go. Both ends of the corridor were now obstructed by some very nasty, malignant obstacles. Going back would do no good, he realized. There was no way out there. He would have to move forward, quickly but carefully, and hope to avoid any pitfalls along the way. He was steeling his nerves for a race out of the corridor when he heard a scraping noise from high above him. With a squeal, Augustus rolled aside and barely missed having his head caved in by a skull made of glowing crystal. Just as it smashed against the floor, a second skull followed it, and another followed that. Augustus continued rolling along the floor, avoiding the deadly missiles as best he could. "Damnation!" he bellowed as he rolled onto something sharp enough to pierce his arm. He had worked his way back to the broken jars and landed right in the gruesome debris. Blood and embalming fluid saturated his sleeve, making Augustus want to vomit. You monstrosity!" he shouted, though he didn't know to whom he was shouting at. Thorn, perhaps? The paw? Ridiculous. It wasn't real. It was not real. But he had seen it. Trembling, Augustus huddled against the wall of the corridor again, eyes darting around, searching for the paw and a means of escape. The floor was now strewn with all sorts of jagged little traps. One wrong step, and he might impale his foot on a shard of glass, or, God forbid, petrified bone. He would have to move carefully, very carefully, to get out. "Don't panic," he whispered to himself as he clambered to his feet. "No matter what happens, stay calm." Step by unsteady step, he picked his way across the floor. Each time something crunched beneath his foot, Augustus froze. Just how many fragile, sharp-edged objects had been stored in the archives? It made for a ridiculously unsafe work environment, he thought. "I simply must talk to Dr. Sound about this," he muttered. "I'll file a whole list of complaints." He was halfway down the corridor now. Not much farther to go. He could do it. He just had to take his time and be careful. When the gaslight nearest to him flickered out, Augustus snapped his head around. Something dark and spidery ran along the wall, away from the smothered lamp. He caught a glimpse of it just before it reached the next light and extinguished that one too. Light after light went out in rapid succession. Within moments, the corridor was plunged into darkness. Augustus froze, unsure now of where to place his feet. One wrong move would surely cause him serious harm. He inched forward, hands out in front of him to feel his way through the darkness. "Oh, if I get a hold of that thing, I'll kill it. I'll kill it! I just wish I could find a weapon in all this mess." His foot came down on something wet and slippery at that moment. With a screech, Augustus tumbled backward. He smashed against a set of shelves, bringing the contents crashing down upon him. The din of the wreckage deafened him. Arms flung over his head, Augustus collapsed. When he hit the floor, he felt something skewer his left thigh. Not broken glass this time, but something much more dangerous. The object was long and slender, and he felt a polished handle protruding from the spot where it entered his leg. Augustus clutched at the wound, howling. He had found his weapon. "Oh, please," he cried out to the darkness. "I don't want to die here." The all-too-familiar scrabbling noise came again. He heard it moving over the floor, coming closer and closer to him. Augustus made to crawl away, but the pain in his leg was too great. The darkened corridor grew darker still, as Augustus felt himself grow faint. Was he bleeding to death? Where was that abominable paw? "Damn you, Thorn! This is all your fault!" he wept. The thing in the dark skittered closer, and he shuddered. "Of all the places to die! I hate this bloody archives! I hate this damnable ministry! I wish I wasn't here! I wish I was someplace else! Any place else! Any place at all!" The scrabbling grew louder and louder until it filled the air and threatened to drive him mad. Augustus screamed. The floor beneath him tilted, and he was falling, falling, falling. He landed on a floor of hard-packed earth. A warm breeze, carrying the exotic scents of incense and ripe fruit, whispered in the air. Augustus lifted his head. The light had returned, but the gas lamps had been replaced by crude wooden torches and moonlight. In the wavering luminescence, he saw a gilded figure, huge and grotesquely distorted, looming over him. Its carved face sported the bestial muzzle and protruding brow of an ape. Blood-red rubies glimmered in the depths of its eye sockets. "What is this?" he whimpered. "Where am I?" Augustus tried to roll to his hands and knees, only to cry out in anguish as he disturbed the knife protruding from his leg. "Someone, please help me," he whimpered. A dismal shuffling noise came in answer to his plea. The archivist turned his head and saw a shadowy figure emerge from the darkness. It was a woman with a slender figure and pale flesh. Long dark hair cascaded over one delicate shoulder. "Lady Catherine?" Augustus murmured, squinting into the darkness. Was he so far gone that he was now reliving his last tale? Ah, well, there were worse ways to go. "Catherine, darling," he called out, giving himself up to his fevered imaginings. "You must help me. Come, give us a hand, you saucy wench." Obliging him now, as she never had in his writings, the lady stepped forward and held out her hand. It was only as her grip tightened around his wrist and she leaned forward into the light that Augustus noticed something was horribly wrong. She was missing half her skull, and there was a great gaping hole in her chest. "Oh my!" he gasped with his final breath. "Dear Catherine, I always knew you were heartless." "Whitby? Whitby, you lazy fool! Where are you? I forgot to add something to my report." The door to the archives clanged open, and in strode Field Agent Harrison Thorne. He stalked to the stairs and glared down at the archives beneath him. Thorne had never had much use for the archives in general, but Whitby was such a shiftless layabout he'd made visits to the place completely pointless. If it weren't for the director's insistence that detailed reports be filed on every case, Thorne would never bother with the place at all. "Whitby!" he called out again. He squinted into the vast empty space of the archive's main office. Was it his imagination, or did the place seem unusually dark? It was always a bit dim in the archives, owing to its underground location, but the atmosphere now seemed practically sepulchral. Thorne descended the wrought-iron stairs to the main floor, ears alert for any hint of noise. The man had to be down here somewhere. He was probably hidden away, writing another one of his terrible stories. "Whitby!" Thorne had reached the floor at last. It was indeed darker, he realized, and far too quiet. The usual flickering glow that came from the main corridor of the vaults was extinguished. The only light came from a single gas lamp situated on the wall, near the archivist's desk. Thorne walked toward it, and stepped on something that made a distinct crunching noise beneath his feet. Looking down, he noticed for the first time the litter of loose papers, scattered journals, and fragments of artifacts that surrounded Whitby's desk. Many of the boxes of reports had been toppled. The desk itself was a shambles, a bottle of ink knocked over and bleeding its contents all over the surface. "Bloody hell," Thorne muttered. He grabbed a spare lantern from a hook on the wall, set it on the desk, and lit it. Its feeble orange glow revealed the massive bulk of a card catalog behind Whitby's desk, its wooden surface defaced with heavy gouges and scratches, and most of its drawers missing or broken. Surely it hadn't been like that when he was here an hour ago. Thorne took his lantern and stalked to the corridor, a sense of dread growing in his stomach. The sight that greeted him there transformed the dread into the heavy weight of miserable concern. My God, Whitby, what happened here? But Whitby was not there to answer him. There were traces of the man, to be sure. For whose blood could it be that stained the floor and mingled with the gleaming crystal splinters and rubbery, disintegrated specimens strewn everywhere? The destruction stretched from one end of the lengthy corridor to the other, and resembled a battlefield more than a storage space for missions long since completed. Was it Usher? Thorne wondered. Had they somehow compromised the Ministry's security and broken into the place to steal some treasure? Or was there someone within the Ministry itself, a traitor who had come down here soon after Thorne had left, and then struck down the unsuspecting archivist? Thorne picked his way carefully down the corridor, considering the possibilities until the light of his lantern came to rest on a small, withered object that was far too familiar to him. "Oh no," he breathed. Thorne knelt and picked the mummified paw of a monkey out of a pooling mess of viscous fluid and broken glass. "Whitby, you couldn't have," he muttered to himself, but he knew all too well the possibilities of what might have happened. "What did you wish for, you fool? What could you have wanted that would have caused all this?" Thorne shook his head. He didn't have any answers. He would have to report Whitby's disappearance immediately, he knew. But what could he say about how Whitby disappeared? Should he even mention the paw after what he'd seen here today? No, he decided. It would be best if the cursed thing were forgotten. He tucked the moldering paw into his coat pocket and proceeded through the archives, surveying the rest of the damage. At the far end, he found a box of field reports sitting in front of a heavy wooden door. He pulled on the handle, and the door opened with a shrill screech upon a dank little chamber that reeked of mildew. Thorne stooped and entered, shining his lantern over the grimy paved floor. When he spotted a crack, he was struck with an idea. He stooped and prodded at the stones until he was able to lever one out of its place. Then he fished the paw out of his pocket and tossed it in the gap, and replaced the stone over top of it. He pressed down until he heard a brittle snap, and the stone settled back into place. His objective complete, Thorne stood and exited the chamber. At the door he stopped and looked back into the room. "I wish that no one ever finds you," he said to the darkness. "May you rot here for all eternity, you miserable, despicable thing." And with that, he left, closing the door behind him.